Hello and welcome back. Today we're going to be doing something way different, which is we're going to talk about competitive 3v3v3 in Victoria 3, and if you thought there were enough threes in there, I guess you're right. So in this video, we're going to talk about several things. First of all, an announcement, which is this is what this is. Second of all, we're going to talk about the format for 3v3v3. Then we're going to talk about some metagame ideas, but I just want to emphasize all my ideas on the metagame. I do not play multiplayer currently. I do not know what's best. I haven't tested what's best. This is just based on what I'm inferring is going to be best or interesting about the metagame. And then finally, I have a series of country rankings, the top 16 countries, and hopefully for the people who will be participating, this will be a bit of a guide or some just food for thought in regard to what it's going to look like and what things are going to play out and what ideas you might be able to bring to a sort of competitive 3v3v3 game. A lot of threes in there for Victoria 3. So, first of all, the announcement. Starting this Saturday, I am going to try and put this on. Obviously, I need 9 players. If you would like to sign up, feel free to sign up on the Discord, which will be in the link below. For this, I will be doing first come, first serve, giving priority to people who have flair on the YouTube, if there are more than 9 people signing up. If there's less than 9 people signing up, then we might just do an FFA, but okay. So this is kind of the announcement. It's going to be this Saturday, and rolling forward, going to look to make it this Saturday. The timing is going to be at 9:30 PST, with a hope that people are, maybe doing a roll call at 9:20 or 9:25 PST. That way we can get in alternates if people are not present, and then the teams will be randomly decided unless you have already made your own team of 3 people, in which case might give priority to you and your team being in there if you have already coordinated a team. Still figuring that out. Obviously, I haven't hosted an event like this before, so to some extent, this is a learning experience for me. Let's jump into the format, which I think is quite interesting. So I will make this document available also in the in the comment section below this video, but we're going to talk about the scoring and the draft primarily. The idea is it's going to be a 3v3v3, so 3 teams of 3, because we need all 3s in the right places. Scoring will be based off of a nominal change in GDP for the entire team combined, and so that's we put player 1's GDP, let's say it's Ching with 150, and then Great Britain, I think they're like 25 mil at the start, and then, I don't know, someone who's 5 mil. At the very start, they will have 180 million GDP. If at the end, they're at 210, then they will have a score of 30 million, right? The play will be speed 4, no pausing. There will be 2.5 hours of play, or 20 years, whichever comes first, and this is going to be the idea. For the teams, the countries they will be played, it will be selected via draft. The die roll will go to determine which team selects their draft position, and then once you have the draft position selected, the draft order is going to be Team 1, Team 2, Team 2, Team 3, 3, 3, Team 1, and then Team 2, or Team 1 is going to have the first, 7th, and 8th pick, Team 2 is going to have the 2nd, 3rd, and 9th pick, and Team 3 is going to have the 4th through 6th pick. Currently, no one has tried to convince me that this is especially not fair, although I do think, in particular, Team 2 has kind of the strongest draft position with this format. And so, if you win the die roll, I think Team 2, but I also have really low confidence in this because I don't know what's going to be, Okay, you can trade draft picks. We will not have a timer on the draft, but if someone is taking forever, I'll put like a 30-second or 1-minute timer. I don't think it's going to be necessary. For, how the play is going to be, I'm thinking that it's going to be relatively casual. Not looking to sweat this super hard. I'm just looking to have a format where players have a defined goal in the game, and that goal is a semi-competitive one, but since people are going to be from widely different skill levels, I think that keeping it casual and friendly is going to be nice, and preferable as more of like a community game, necessarily than some sort of cutthroat competitive stuff. I don't have a bunch of rules in here for conduct. I assume people can behave. If they can't, I'll kick them unceremoniously. Okay, so now let's talk about the metagame, or what I think the metagame is going to look like, considering these rules. And I think the biggest thing is, okay, well, why do you have 3 teams. And I think that this is an essential element is, for anyone who's familiar with the Three Kingdoms era, that was a period of warring states in China. There was eventually 3 nations, and they formed this tripedal sort of balance, wherein one country, if they got too strong, the other 2 would just join against that one country. And I think that this helps to balance out Victoria 3 for competitive, because fairly obvious in a 1v1, for example, France just crushes Great Britain. It doesn't really matter how strong the players are at the very start of the game. It's not a big deal. But 2 teams can very easily crush any one other team, at game outset with proper play. And so what you have instead is a diplomatic situation where players are encouraged, or teams are encouraged, to, work to prevent one team from getting too strong, and pay attention to this and work diplomatically, in order to try and get their team ahead. And I think that this is an interesting metagame thing that can be going on that will also serve to balance the very obvious imbalances, that are appearing in vanilla Victoria, because obviously a lot of the nations are not all the same strength, and they're not even remotely close, but with this sort of thing, it can serve to balance stuff out, because, for example, if one team gets a really good draft, the other 2 teams can try and recognize and identify this, and this is, an indication of skill, or a manifestation of skill, recognizing when you need to negotiate, and also negotiating with other players, which is, a non-in-game skill that is required to try and play this well, because it's not like, a 1v1 or a 5v5. It's a 3v3v3, baby. Okay. I think it will also prevent blowouts, because if one player is obviously the weakest, they should just try and kingmake the second best player in order to kneecap the strongest player. And so I think that if one team is looking particularly weak, and you are the second strongest, you should really actually avoid killing off that player, because it's not in your best interest, because if you turn it into a 1v1 and you're in a bad spot, you're gonna have a bad time, right? Okay, I also think that this tripedal balance makes the game more economically focused, because if 2 players have existential war against each other, Great Britain versus France, let's say, and 2 players are at the helm, they're going to handle it way better than the AI. You're going to suffer a lot of casualties. You might not get what you want, this sorts of stuff, and it makes PvP risky, because if 2 teams are locked in their battle, first of all, the third team can really influence who wins the war, right? If the third team wants to dow either one of the teams. But also, the third team can just gobble up a whole bunch of, the neutral territory, as it were, and create a situation that is favorable to the third team, while the other 2 teams just slap around each other, right? And so I think that this is an interesting thing. And finally, I think that one thing that's particularly interesting about the 3v3v3 is you can use the cut down to size CB pretty aggressively, right? And you can do it in a way where you can actually maybe get it to work. If someone's over 100 infamy, you can cut down to size them, and it returns everything. And so this creates an interesting opportunity for 2 teams to really just say, hey, one team's gotten way too big, way too fast, we're going to cut them down to size. And I think that this will help to prevent, blowouts or runaways with the game. A second thing is, okay, well, why are you doing teams in this format? Why not just make it 1v1v1? Well, I think that having teams will, create a lot of interesting opportunities in the game. First of all, you can have multiple wars at the same time, which you cannot, with this current situation, which will allow you to, put multiple. It will allow you to engage in the game in a multifaceted way, where you can kind of assign wars. So let's say we have a team with Egypt, Prussia, and Russia, right? All the Ushas. And we decide that, Egypt is going to gobble up, some of the territories over here. Russia's going to take some Qing territory or Central Asian territory, and Prussia's going to focus on unification, maintaining low infamy or something like this, so that they can pick up the minors. So Prussia gets assigned, the role of picking up the low infamy stuff that is useful to pick up, and this sort of stuff. And so you can engage in a sort of infamy management regarding expansion, where maybe you want one of your teammates to just have a really high blow blown out infamy, and they're going to suffer all the consequences of that, while you as Prussia, just try and play nice with the German miners, and you're taking stuff like Brunei, which doesn't take a lot of infamy, or Bahrain, which doesn't take a lot of infamy. Of course, players in expansion teams are going to be competing for the juiciest expansion targets, right, as well. And so this is going to be important to keep in mind. If Netherlands isn't picked, then transfer the Dutch East Indies might be a very strong, CB at the very start of the game, something like this, because you can't puppet them at the start of the game because they start out as a major power, but eventually they go minor, but you don't have to wait for that. Another thing to note is, for drafting teams, if a country is unrecognized, you can think of them as being recognized, right? Because as long as you have a GP on your team, you can just dow your teammate, yes, and then have them back down and give recognition. There's currently not a huge penalty, or I don't even think any penalty for acceding to recognition, and so you can think of both China and Japan as being already recognized, just a little further behind on the tech sort of thing. There's also, another reason to have 3 players is you can engage in trading and migration sorts of strategies. In particular, like Russia starts out with a really high population, and so Russia pairing up with, a New World country, for example, like Brazil, will allow, the Russians to effectively get rid of all of their peasants faster, or de-peasant themselves faster. Now, this won't help Russia, but it will help the team because it will give Brazil a ton of labor, for example. And so you can make strategies around this sort of thing. But also, notably, if you're going to try and have them in the same customs union, which Brazil can do because they're not a great power, you're going to also run a risk. And you need to have them in the customs union for the migration, right? In that other teams can try and really cut your supply routes in the event of a war or these sorts of things. And so, okay. Also, another thing to note is you can gift each other provinces and trade provinces. An idea I was thinking about, when thinking about what the metagame would look like is, China often runs into a problem where they get an enormous amount of unemployment as a result of their arable land being built out and pops being fired, and they can't really fix it. One thing you could do if you had a team with, China and USA, or even trading across teams, is you could trade a Chinese province, which is going to be very valuable because it has a lot of pops, right? And it's going to have a lot of arable land, all this output from subsistence, this sort of thing. It's a valuable province, even if, the 20-year time period isn't fast enough to get multiculturalism. You could trade it to USA for, let's say, well, not Texas yet, but let's assume USA is going to have Texas, or let's talk about Mexico having California. You could trade this for California, which has a ton of unused subsistence farms, right? And so you could use this as an outlet for your unemployment if you're playing as China specifically. Trading for and getting some of these New World provinces might be very valuable. And also just trading provinces, for example, Great Qing, you might say, hey, we're going to trade Russia this province, in return for their help in this war against Austria, this sort of thing. And so you can negotiate and work together, both internally with your own team, but also with other teams in order to try and jockey ahead and push for that GDP, high level. Now, it's important to note, at the very end of the game, whether that's 2.5 hours or 20 years, every player is going to want to jam up a huge amount of government spending, even if it's not sustainable, just build infinite barracks or whatever, this sort of thing, because the government spending is going to increase the size of the GDP. It's going to inflate it artificially, but this is something all of the players can do. Now, as far as, military goes, there's going to be a few strategies that I think are going to be particularly useful in multiplayer, or this is going to be playing out in multiplayer, and the first is conscription is going to be pretty key. I think when you're playing against the AI, you are going to want to have a really small army, and when you're playing against players, you're going to want an enormous army, which makes conscription specifically very, very, very useful, because this gives you the most flexibility as opposed to having a standing army. I'm not sure because I haven't played multiplayer, but I imagine the metagame might be national militia or mass conscription, specifically because you can put in decrees that allow you to really pump up and get the 100 conscription center max level. This further will make valuable provinces, with Chinese provinces, the really high pop provinces, because these will have a ton of conscripts. And if China, for example, as we discussed earlier, traded a sort of a province to Mexico, and Mexico was on national militia, Mexico would have a battalion of 100, and Mexico could juice it up with their higher, military technology. And so really there might be quite a bit of jockeying for teams to have a sort of idea of having, a tech draft and then a pop draft and then swapping some provinces and this sort of thing. Interesting strategies that are not fully explorable in like vanilla base 1v1. And I'm hoping that this is a bit of an interesting thing that could be played for. Now, let's jump into the country rankings, because I think that this is a bit interesting, and it can also illustrate a lot of ideas, and I think it'll also give, the players this Saturday a bit of a good idea as to what they should be going for. So starting off in 16th place, I have Egypt here. Now, it's important to recognize that these guys are in fact recognized, or you treat them as recognized, because the assumption is you're going to draft at least one GP, you can declare war for recognition. It's not a big deal. You have a very solid amount of battalions, a solid GDP, and a solid population, as well as a fairly good spot geographically speaking. Overall, Egypt's not like the strongest choice, but they are pretty good. The Sinai Canal, I don't think the game will go late enough, but I think in a format where you're playing the game longer, I think the Sinai Canal is pretty substantive, especially with Convoy's nerf in 1.3. Next up, we have Two Sicilies. Now, Two Sicilies has a decent amount of resources. They don't really have the most pops, but they are fairly strong. They have decent GDP, decent population, but I think importantly, it can be very easy for the other teams to sort of or your other two teammates to facilitate the creation of Italy, allowing you to integrate all these provinces quickly, and then you become someone quite a bit stronger. In 14th and 13th place, we have Brazil and Mexico, which is much the same idea, which is with a European partner, you can very quickly gain access to a large population, or this can help facilitate your population. You have a ton of natural resources, more in the case of Brazil, but Mexico has gold, quite a lot of it, and I really didn't know which one to rank higher than the other. I have a sneaking suspicion Brazil is 13 and Mexico is 14, but okay. Next up, in 12th place, we have the Ottoman Empire. Now, the Ottoman Empire has access to a ton of resources, and is, they have access to a ton of resources, and they also have access to a very large population. Population is going to be very important, and notably, a big chunk of this population is in fact European. Let's switch over to their country, and I can take a look, or we can take a look together. They have a large population of Greeks, which is going to be pretty good because these are going to be accepted, and you are going to be able to move these around, and use them for migration to other countries that are maybe going to need the population more, like, for example, maybe not France, but the UK population isn't super high, so the Ottomans might be a good partner for them because they have an advantage of technology, but they don't have a lot of pop, and they can bring over the pop, this sort of thing. Next up, we have Netherlands, which I'm not really sure how to rank at number 11, because this is under the assumption that your GDP is not that big, your pop's not that big, but I think you, day one, can very much just annex the East India Company, or the Dutch East Indies, as your sort of strategy, which will jump up, your GDP quite a bit and your pop quite a bit, and give you a respectable number in both. But the other two teams can fiddle around with this sort of annexation attempt, right? They can join against you, they can do this sort of thing. And so it is difficult to evaluate the Netherlands. I think they might be strong, or relatively strong, 11th place strong. I'm not expecting them to get drafted, but this would be the idea behind the Netherlands, which was going to come up. It's another idea behind Great Britain and the Dutch East Indies, an awkward situation where you have this huge vassal that you can annex on day one. Okay, moving on to 10th place, we have Japan. And Japan's main advantage is you have quite a large population, you have a decent GDP, you are going to get recognized from one of your teammates, and you have just about every resource imaginable, and it is really hard to beat you up. You are in a very safe position here as Japan, because there's no one adjacent to you, and players can defend against landings fairly well, which I suppose we didn't discuss kind of during the metagame as much as we should, but when you are getting double landed, you can just recruit another general, and you can really kill a lot of troops if you are paying close attention to when you are getting double landed. As soon as the first battle starts, you just recruit another general, and then that general will be available for the second battle. Okay. Something also to note about the Ottoman Empire, which we didn't mention, is we do have the sick man of Europe, which is one of the reasons why they kind of score a little bit lower. I think they would, without this sort of event, you know, you could score them quite a bit higher than 12th, but we have them in 12th right now, with Japan in 10th. Finally, in 9th place, we have Spain. Spain might get drafted. I think that it's a fairly good draft. You know, they have a decent amount of battalions, a decent amount of military strength at the start of the game with 284. They also have subjects that they can easily annex. And also just, you know, kind of inflate their market, this sort of thing. They're pretty strong. They have a decent amount of navy at the start, which is not necessarily the most important thing, but it is a bit nice. And they're just overall going to be good. I think one of the reasons why Spain kind of is going to be better than Japan, like if you look at the numbers, you're like, hey, the GDP and the population, I'm not sure about this one. Well, Spain can form Iberia, and so if they can subjugate Portugal, they can integrate all of this very, very quickly, and this can be helped facilitated by the other two teammates, and so it makes a pretty good last pick. Okay, next up we have the top 9, or sorry, Spain was 9th. Okay, so that's the top 9. Now, the 9 through 1, I've thought about a lot more than, you know, 16 through 10, because I think that these are probably the ones that are going to get drafted, and there's one really awkward situation, which we'll get to in a second, but before that, in 8th place, we have Prussia. Prussia's a little on the weak side, both in terms of GDP and pop. I do think you can do a lot of low infamy expansion in here, though, on all these small powers, and try and form Germany. Obviously, Austria is going to block you, but you can form the North German Fed, maybe. You're going to have some difficulties if they kind of fight you over Hesse-Kassel, but this is going to be where negotiation comes into play, and maybe you can try and work something out with Austria, but they also just do have an enormous amount of resources. And, you know, the Austrian team might want to fight you for them, but Silesia specifically, just tons and tons of resources. You're going to be in a good position to expand. You also have relatively good tech, and so Prussia scores pretty high. Next up, we have the difficult one. In 7th place, we have East India Company, and I really am not sure in a lot of ways how to rate them and this sort of stuff because they are subject of the UK. And obviously, there's the very awkward situation. What happens if one team drafts the UK and another drafts the East India Company? Currently, I don't have any rule in place for this. There might be a house rule, or we might formulate some sort of rule that it seems reasonable, whether it's releasing the East India Company or forcing it so that you have to draft the two together. I think both of these are reasonable, but in terms of what's going on for the East India Company, you have access to an enormous population, but unfortunately they're discriminated against. And so this presents difficulties, but you do have access to, you know, a lot of population, and I may be underrating them, but I think that you'll be in a difficult situation if the UK is on a different team, and so they are perhaps less valuable by virtue of being on a different team, but having access to all of these pops and also all these subjects is quite good. You'll be behind on tech, but this isn't such a big deal. You'll have, you know, both pop and GDP, which are both very valuable. Next up, we have the USA, of which there's a ton of resources in the USA. They also have pretty solid pop at the start of the game, and specifically I think you can use a lot of strategies with the higher pop powers in Europe to really get things rolling quite quickly, because when they are not going to formulate any sort of unemployment because you can siphon off the pops if you can get into their customs union, which will require you somehow decreasing your power rank, but that doesn't seem too difficult. And so some strategies where you are using migration to kind of make the pops be more efficient, you know, Russia, USA, the Unholy Alliance, the anti-Cold War, this might be good, you know, because USA can help make use of the population faster, and also, yeah, just mainly that. Okay, next up we have Austria. Now, Austria has a huge population, access to a ton of resources, and one of the strongest armies at the very start of the game with 1212. I think it might be the second strongest, and so perhaps I'm not scoring Austria high enough, but Austria, yeah, I think it is the second strongest army at the start of the game. Austria is just in an extraordinarily good spot. They also have, you know, this unique building, or this probably won't come into play because I don't know if people will get to electricity in 2.5 hours, but Austria is quite strong. You have the population, you can can, you know, do strategies that involve having someone piggyback off of you in the new world. I think just, you know, you being strong in general is pretty good. You're in a bit of a weird spot, though. You are going to have you know, Prussia to your north, Russia. So you're kind of going to be next to other GPs, and you don't have a lot of navy at the start of the game. This is maybe not such a big problem, but it's just something to note. And if you have two Sicilies on your team, you can give them the provinces to allow them to form Italy. I think that having your low infamy person being either two Sicilies or Prussia makes sense, although I think two Sicilies is a little too weak to draft. But I think that you can also try and get the German unification, try and get Mega Germany, and maybe Austria should be fourth or even third. A little bit hard to tell. Next up we have Great Qing, which is the elephant in the room. They start off with the highest GDP in the game, and they have an enormous population, and so you're really going to be able to crank up that GDP quite effectively, I think. And since it's scored based on GDP, this might be a bit of a sleeper. It's weird to say someone's a sleeper at 4, but their military really sucks at the start of the game as well. And so this is kind of... this is going to be a country that the other two teams can decide to abuse your pick of early on, and also maybe just demand, hey, we want provinces, although I think that aggressive demand is a good way to alienate other people from negotiations later. But this does present a sort of interesting thing where you are just blasting pop here, and you should probably give away, you know, some of your provinces to your teammates, both to allow instant market access, this sort of stuff, but also you know, in trades for whatever works, especially if you have a New World teammate. I think in particular USA, Great Qing are probably going to make good teammates, but USA is probably going to make good teammates with a lot of people, and so is Great Qing. And so these flexible spots where they're maybe not as strong entirely, but have really good advantages in terms of, you know, various factors, like you know, the USA having a bunch of like unfilled stuff for migration, and Qing having a ton of pops might be really good. I think specifically you feeding another person with good military technology provinces for the purpose of just them getting a really big conscription center, a really fat conscription center. I think this is going to be a really strong aspect of China that isn't really, you know, internalized in the power you have here. And like here, they can feed conscription centers to other people. Okay, next up we have the United Kingdom. And this one, or the next three, I think are kind of all tied. I'm not really sure who's strongest. It's a bit of a weird spot. The United Kingdom I scored as third, which is a little bit lower than expected maybe, because I expect that you might have problems with the East India Company. I think it's worth other teams drafting. I think the way that things play out, that, you know, there's a good chance that Great Britain is picked in by Team 2, and then Team 2 is going to get 2nd, 3rd, and 9th pick. And so I don't think you're third picking East India Company, and I think that someone else is likely to pick it up, and so you will have to resolve this awkward tension where they are going to want to get free. They might try and elicit help to get free, but if they can't get free and you can annex them, you'll be obviously the best. But this means that the other two teams really don't want to allow this. And I think if you assume that East India Company breaks free, that the UK is quite strong still. 3rd place, we're giving it to them. But they are not, you know, the enormous lion that they feel like in vanilla, because they lose access to, you know, some of their biggest power here. You still have subjects, you still have a ton of resources, you still have a really strong market, all this stuff, but it is just something to keep in mind. Now in 2nd place, I'm really uncertain whether or not this should be 2nd or 1st, but we have Russia. Russia notably has the very, very best chop chops in the entire game, which is going to be the very best thing early on, and you can just blast it because you have these really, really good modifiers. And so this in particular, the logging industry throughput, is not even hardwood, it's logging industries, is extraordinarily strong. You also have access to an enormous population, and you have just so much room to grow as a consequence of these. You know, you have both Perm and Ural, which are going to have bonuses on iron, and so the early game is really characterized by an increase in wood and iron output, and Russia's has an affinity for both of those. Notably, Brazil has somewhat of an affinity, but they have a lot of negative construction modifiers from Amazon and this type of stuff, and the USA has some of these as well, but I think you're going to be able to grow the economy really, really quick as Russia. And so the GDP's, let's say, only 38 mil, but I think that Russia might be able to run away with it. Now, the Russia's weakness, their military at the start of the game. What? Did this get buffed? Their military at the start of the game, I think, has much higher power projection than I recall in 1.2. This might have been changed from 1.3. 1.2 is when I did a lot of analysis with who I thought was best. It looks like their military strength is now stronger than France at the very start of the game. And so, okay, in that case, I'm probably going to say Russia's #1 then. Because my understanding was their military was not as strong as France's at the start of the game, but we're going to put Russia in at #1 in that case. Now, Russia's main weakness is you are going to be behind in technology, and so you might want to have a higher technology ally. You might want to, you know, have an ally in the New World, this sort of thing, because they can make use of your population, because remember, it's about team GDP growth, not your own GDP growth, and a lot of the New World will accept the Russian pops where they wouldn't accept the Xing pops. And so we're going to put Russia in first, and then we're going to talk about France. Because France, I was thinking was going to be first, but I guess we'll rate them second now. But again, with 1 through 3, really not certain where these lie, really not confident where they are relative to each other. France has an extremely strong military at the start of the game. I thought it was the strongest, but I guess just the size of the Russian military. I think even with this power projection, though, France's military might be better, despite having a lower power projection, because they can conscript. The conscription is not proportional, and in terms of the size of the Russian military being way bigger, I guess it kind of is, but the conscription edicts, you can't quite put down as many. I'm not really sure. France does start with the best military tech, so they'll make better use of, for example, trading for Great Qing provinces, this type of thing. They're very strong at the start of the game. I think if you don't capitalize on this strength, you know, you have maybe a little bit less potential for growth than Russia. I was going to make this point about putting Russia in 3rd place, but now I just kind of think Russia's in 1st place. Except I do think they lose a war, a day 1 war with France. And so I haven't tested this, though. I'm not entirely sure if both are controlled by players. This has been interesting to see, but I guess it's kind of between these two, with the understanding that Great Britain's really good, but I think if you play Great Britain, you're going to have this awkward situation with the East India Company. But maybe you can just try and convince the other teams that if they draft the East India Company, you're going to make life difficult for them, and you assure them that you won't annex the East India Company. That way they don't decide to pick on you, this type of thing. But yeah, those are the power rankings. Let's jump in, and I have a document for it, which I was reading, in case anyone was curious. This is the ranks as we have them. I think we're going to move Russia up here and then move France down and have these as the power rankings going in with absolutely no data. Obviously haven't run a 3v3v3 before. This is going to be the start of the thing. And so this is very, very quickly going to be subject to change. But I think this is a good starting point to kind of think about how these countries are particularly powerful and who people might want to draft this Saturday. And hopefully they can formulate some sort of strategies and decide what they think is good. And I hope this video has been either entertaining or helpful or inspiring or this sort of thing. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, or drop in this Saturday. Going to try and get this off. You can also sign up for this in the Discord currently. Currently there's 3 people signed up already. Just go to the LFG section and type "I will take the ring to Mordor," and I will put you on the list. Again, priority to people who have some sort of flair on the YouTube, whether that's a public sub or hearted commenter, this sort of thing. And other than that, have a good day.